Hi, everyone. Welcome to Aging in Action. I'm your host, Joy Wirta.
I'm Nikki Sage.
And
I'm Lisette Wirta.
And I'm Gwen Price.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're talking about advanced care planning, and our guest today is Laurel Gillespie with the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association. She is the Director of Advanced Care Planning. So welcome to the show, Laurel.
Hi, thank you so much, Joy and Gwen and Lisette and Nikki for having us here today.
So Laurel, just give us a little bit of background on Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association and exactly what is advanced care planning? Because I'm sure we have a few listeners and viewers kind of wondering today.
So Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association is an association that represents a multitude of organizations across the country when it comes to delivering high quality and accessible palliative and hospice care. So part of one of the programs that we do run is in advanced care planning. And that started really in about 2008, the couple of predecessors before me and our executive director, Sharon Baxter. We really felt that in the medical world, people have their wills and they have their powers of attorney, but what was missing was really, when it came down to the crunch, was do we really know what someone wants throughout the trajectory of their care from the medical side, and are we really respecting their values and beliefs and wishes? And advanced care planning is the vehicle to actually document that and have it respected when one day you're not able to voice your own wishes for yourself.
I think it's been a really a topic that's just in the last few months. It doesn't matter where you, I guess, what show you're viewing or listening to on the radio, media, social media. Advanced care planning has really become a front runner in conversations right now. Where do you see a need yourself in advanced care planning? What's missing in that, in the loop?
Well, you know, what's really interesting, Joy, with the beginning of this partnership with Health Canada, we ran a Nanos poll, and it was quite a large sampling size, and 80% of Canadians across the country believe that advanced care planning was important to identify a substitute decision maker, record what their wishes are, revisit it often. There's really 5 steps, and we can go through that later, but only 1 in 5 people actually have engaged in the process of creating an advanced care plan to document what their wishes and values and beliefs are. And my philosophy behind it is that it's a win-win-win-win situation. It's a difficult conversation to start, but once you put your thoughts down on paper and record them, it almost lifts a burden off of your shoulders. It's the one thing that we often fear, is not knowing what's going to happen in our future. But what you actually have some control over, voicing what you would like to have happen. So with advanced care planning, I think, you know, my goal is to normalize that conversation, have people recognize that it's a healthy part of living a life that's well planned. We go through painstaking, you know, steps to ensure that we have our financial house in order, that we, you know, have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed when it comes to getting a puppy, for instance. But when it comes to our own healthcare or our future needs, spiritually, medically, we don't often voice them appropriately. And I think for the individual, it's a very important procedure or thing to go through to document what your advanced care planning wishes are. It helps your families and loved ones right through to the process of grieving and bereavement, because you don't leave behind people that are left guessing, did I do the right thing or did I make the right decision? It also removes a lot of the burdens on healthcare professionals who aren't, you know, second guessing themselves. Does this person want this procedure? Is it actually going to help them? It helps to end needless suffering in some cases. And as well, it's a win for the government, because then we can find efficiencies within our healthcare system to maybe reduce those numbers of tests that somebody wouldn't have wanted necessarily had they been able to voice that for themselves.
I just had a question, because I know when I go to see my doctor, he asked me, okay, so if I have to, you're at this position, who's going to help make the decision, and what's, I struggle every time he asks me what do I want, because my criteria, I said, okay, if I don't recognize my son, let me go. But I struggle all the time with that that level of I guess, I don't know. I don't know how to make that decision.
You know, Gwen, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think you're not alone. I think a lot of people really are challenged by that. And I like to redirect the conversation back to looking inward at yourself and thinking, what are the things in my life that bring me joy? And it's not so matter a thought process about end of life care necessarily. It's more about, how well do I want to live while I'm still here? What does that quality of life mean to me? So for you, it's not being able to recognize your son. For other people, it might be not being able to go out for that daily walk. It could mean a whole host. It means something different to everyone. But if you kind of look at it from the phase of, well, how do I want to live the rest of my life? And if I'm not able to live and do the things that bring me joy and happiness and give me that sense of self-fulfillment, whether it's the volunteer job that you might have, or your work, or your hobbies, or your family or loved ones. And it's kind of checking things out around those things that can kind of make it a little bit easier. Now, when you're having these conversations, for instance, with your medical professionals, those questions can be framed slightly differently based on medical diagnoses, prognoses. What is your future going to look like when, because usually once you receive a diagnosis, it's not going to get better, unfortunately. And we have to be able to think about those kinds of thoughts of, what does that mean for you, and how does that impact the things that bring you happiness and self-fulfillment? So I kind of like to try to get people to look at it from that perspective, is, how do I want to live the rest of my life? And how do I want to live if I'm not able to speak for myself one day? I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, it does. No, it gives you a different way of looking at it. Yeah, because it's like I say, every couple of years I struggle with, what do I say to him this time?
And the time to do it is not when you're sitting in the doctor's office and they tell you that you have a terminal illness or a serious illness. The time to do it is now, while you're healthy, while you're not having to deal with a crisis mode. So I think I reflect back on myself. I was 38. My twins were 9 years old. My youngest was 6. I was a military wife. I lived in Ottawa. I have no family here, and I was diagnosed with triple negative cancer with a 20% chance of survival for 5 years. And I went, whoa,
yeah.
Whoa. And to start thinking, you're already overwhelmed. So that's not the ideal time to start thinking about how well you want to live the rest of your life. It's before then. And identifying those things that really matter most to you and making those a priority, and making sure the people around you understand what those things are, those intrinsic values to you, and what makes Gwen Gwen, and what would make Gwen be extremely unhappy if her life were to suddenly change, right? What are you willing to kind of give or take?
Good advice.
Nikki, I know you had a question. We were just discussing a little bit before about advanced care planning, and what was your question?
Well, I have a few.
Go for it. Go for it.
I mean, as we're discussing it, I mean, I'm 29. I've just started working on my own will and creating that. And I mean, we've used a lot of terminology, right? We've talked about wills on an episode. We've talked about powers of attorney. Substitute decision makers, and now we're bringing in this advanced care planning. And I guess I'm just, 2 questions. I'm looking for one, when is the right time to start discussing this? I mean, am I too late? Me and my husband have had discussions about what we want, and I've trusted my husband in having those discussions, that he knows what I want. He knows me and I know him. But at the same time, as we're talking, I feel so unprepared, and it's kind of scary. Right? It seems like a lot of information. And like you said, you don't necessarily want to talk about it, but we have to talk about it. So, I mean, when do you start? When should you start? And you had mentioned now. And where do you go to start this plan?
I'm so glad, Nikki, that you brought this up, because it can be really overwhelming when you don't know where to go, where to turn, and what do all these things, and how do they fit together? Right? What's the connection between them? So if you look at it this way, it's kind of like the advanced care planning piece meshes together the medical part with all that fun legal stuff. But the challenge is that it's great. I love that you're doing your will. Those are really important pieces to have in planning a life well lived. But sometimes what happens is, let's say you're in a sudden car accident, and on the unlikely, unfortunate circumstance that would ever happen. It takes time to access your will. It takes time to dig out the power of attorney. And if your wishes, your sort of, as they pertain to what your values and beliefs are, and your medical side of things, if those aren't documented clearly somewhere, and wills don't generally cover that kind of stuff, where is this information, and is it rapidly accessible? So my hope is to one day actually start when kids, as soon as you get a driver's license when you're 16, on the back of your driver's license and your health card, because 16 is when you also get your first picture ID for your OHIP card, let's say in Ontario. I'd like to see a QR code that rapidly accesses your advanced care plan on the back. So should you find yourself in an emergency room, your medical team knows right away, this person does not want to receive CPR 10 times and have broken ribs. Let's say it's a case of a 90-year-old who shows up, they live alone and the family hasn't been contacted yet. Well, there is no power of attorney at the hospital. There's no will at the hospital. So it's another vehicle for making sure that your medical team can reference what those wishes are, if that makes sense. And the time to do it now, it's never too early. The odd occasion it can be too late when you don't have the capacity to make those decisions, but perhaps you've already decided on a substitute decision maker, as is the case in Ontario. And it gets quite complicated depending upon where you live, because each province and territory is slightly different. Some provinces call it a statutory decision maker, whereas here in Ontario it's called a substitute decision maker. But wherever you live, advanced care planning, it's available, downloadable for free. You can do your online workbook. You can order a hard copy one that looks like this here that you can go through if you have a loved one that you want to work through one. We have those available that we can mail out to you, or you can just download it and print it off to have a conversation with a loved one. We have little bookmarks. We have emergency cards that you can keep in your wallet identifying who your substitute decision maker is. This is where we're at now, but it's such an important subject matter, especially in light of the times that we're living through today, to make sure that your values and your wishes are well documented, and that your circle of trust, the people closest to you, know what your wishes are. I hope that kind of answers your question a little.
No, it definitely does. And I mean, this terminology and learning about this, like, I wish it was offered even in school, like growing up, so I could have learned what this was. I only know about it because we talked about these on our episodes. I hear people talking about it in, my line of work. So there's a lot of it.
I was going to say, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
I bet in your earlier years, when you were even younger, I bet you knew all about organ donation.
No.
Right? No, not when you got a driver's license.
But no, there's a lot of, no, I know exactly what I obviously knew about my driver's license, and I knew that these were the steps to take to get my driver's license. But I just feel that there's a lot of really important life choices, life decisions that just are getting missed, I guess, in education. So I just find that you're saying 16. Why don't we have this?
Why not? Age of majority is 18 in the country. But it's important to engage younger people too, to have these conversations, because they can make a big difference. We all have heard of, terrible, tragic circumstances with younger people, and the parents sometimes are left wondering what would they have wanted. And, as much as we think we know another person really well, it's these most raw, intimate thoughts that we could be really far off and not have any idea at all. And until you really engage in having these conversations, you're kind of left a little bit blindsided, and you can be really surprised by, wow, I really thought we were super close, but I had no idea that they would have preferred to be, have their funeral or whatever, that they wanted to become a tree one day instead of having a traditional, there's so many options out there, but it's important to have these hard, difficult sometimes to get going, but essential conversations.
Lisette, did you have a question?
Well, I do actually. Laurel, you mentioned something a little bit earlier about the 5 steps. So I've been thinking about that. Is there like a cookie cutter instruction manual for all us?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
no, for sure, Lisette. And I like to, I'm hoping one day to run some kind of a campaign, because to me, it's really as simple as just getting your ducks in a row. And it's the 5-step process is really about, thinking about, you have to have this conversation with yourself first, right? thinking about what's right for you, not what somebody else might want. And I think deep down, I think for most people that I have these conversations with, the biggest thing is we just don't want to be a burden on anyone, right? That's number one. But you have to think about what's right for you. And you have to learn sometimes about, what is entailed like in certain medical procedures. And if I was, in pain and suffering, would I want to continue on with my chemotherapy treatment? Having, some thought process, hopefully you're healthy when you're starting to do this, but thinking about, some medical procedures that maybe you've heard of, thinking, I really wouldn't want to be hooked up to machines for 6 or 8 or 10 months. And leaving my family not knowing what to do if I suddenly was in that position. So you need to really learn about some of what your options are around what would be best for you. Choose your substitute decision maker. Make sure that they're aware and they're in alignment with what it is that you want. And sometimes we think that our best substitute decision maker is the person that's most entrusted to us or close to us, like a partner. And however, there are certain circumstances where that's probably not the ideal person, because when it comes down to it, they may not be able to make really difficult decisions on your behalf, which is natural in some situations. But you need to talk about what your wishes are and then revisit them often, sort of birthdays or tax time or some significant event to you, an anniversary. And revisit them, because situations, circumstances change, life's milestones. Like Nikki, you're at the very beginning of your married life, and now you're looking at doing your will. Well, you want to revisit this when circumstances change. Maybe one day you're going to start a family. Well, that might change again, and make you pause for thought. Is this reflective of what my situation is today? You want to record it somewhere, like in a hard copy of the workbook, or download it from our website at advancedcareplanning.ca, and keep a copy of it. Make sure your family physician knows that you're engaged in advanced care planning. And then again, you want to review it periodically, and make sure that you talk with your substitute decision maker. And if you're comfortable, even beyond your substitute decision maker. And I think I'm going to speak personally, again, referencing my own circumstances as the youngest of 8 children. We really didn't have a good appreciation of what either parent had wanted going into their passing. But one thing we knew for certain is that they would not have wanted to languish on machinery to keep them alive forever. But it certainly can make things a lot easier for everyone involved when you participate in the process. And it's really not that difficult. It's just hard getting started, I think. Once you've done it, it's like, wow, I feel so much better. It's like getting it off your chest. It lifts a burden. And it's something that we fear because we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see what's coming down the future. But if we know that we have some autonomy over our personal being and our own body, and we can record that and have it respected, that's such a powerful thing and so empowering when you are faced one day with an illness. So I hope that kind of answers that thought or question.
Yeah, no,
Sorry,
great.
Lisette. So if a viewer checks out your website, and we're going to share your information on aginginaction.ca as well, in addition to the episode, do they just take this whole planning kit that they've sat down and done, do they include that with their will, with their other legal documents, and keep it in a safe place? Is that where they need to store it and it's finalized, it's good to go?
Yep, for now, that's basically what we have. But making sure that your medical team is aware that you have your advanced care plan. But every time you make a change to it, you also have to know who's got access to it and that those changes are reflected. So that's very important. And as I say, that QR code one day for me right onto your health card and or your driver's license would be a key factor, because it would be instantly accessible. And I'm hopeful that one day we'll get there. But for now, yeah, making sure your legal team is also aware is very, very important, and that they maybe have a copy of it. But again, it's updating it, right? And we did in the last year or so develop a resource that was for lawyers by lawyers, because often the legal community doesn't speak the same language as the medical community, and the medical community doesn't speak the same language, and there's often a disconnect, right? So it is important to keep your team aware of any changes that you have and where those documents are stored. whether it be electronically. And the nice thing is that you can you can go online and complete your workbook online and save it as a downloadable PDF that you can share with whomever.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So, and
neat.
that's www.advancedcareplanning.ca. And there's no D on advanced. It's just advanced. Yeah, I made that mistake when I first started with the organization.
Well, we're going to definitely make sure
Yeah.
that we add that to our website, like I mentioned, so our
Yes.
viewers can go there and they can start utilizing some of the great resources that you guys have. Laurel, before we end up, wrapping up this episode, is there any final thoughts that you have that you'd like to add to the viewers watching?
I would like to say that if my one message that I would like to impart to people is that this really is truly one of the biggest and best gifts that you could ever give to your loved ones is the gift of them knowing what it is that you would want, how well you want to live until the very end. Whether you're at the beginning of, an illness or you're not even ill yet, but giving that gift and that knowledge to someone else so you don't leave them guessing is one of the greatest acts of love and kindness that you can impart and give to someone else. And if you look at it that way, instead of just another to-do list thing to check off, I think it helps people to reflect on it a little bit differently. And there's no better time than right now, today. Start the conversation. Just start it. Even if it's a brief conversation that you have while you're commuting or going out to the grocery store with a significant other or someone close to you, just say, hey, yeah, I thought about this. And at least they're aware. It's a place to start. It doesn't always have to be formally documented, but that always has more of an impact in the hospital care setting if it ever got to that point. It's the greatest gift of love.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on and helping us help the Northern community age in action. You shared some really great information. Hopefully everyone's going to go home and start a little bit of a conversation tonight and start their plan. And like you said, now's the time, right? So thank you for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to share all your information on www.aginginaction.ca. So at this point, we want to thank you for coming on and stay safe, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks,
Thank
Laurel.
Thank you again for the opportunity, and you all take care and stay safe as well.
You
Thanks,
too.
Laurel. Take
Thanks,
care.
Laurel. Take care.
Bye.